Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another legal breaking reporting video analysis update. Judge Immergut, a Trump appointee, has ruled in her earlier conclusion of a temporary injunction, this time in a permanent injunction, permanently banning and barring the Trump administration from federalizing 200 National Guard soldiers to the streets of Portland to, quote, counter war-ravaged Portland. It's not really war-ravaged, ladies and gentlemen, because I have family currently there that live there, and as well as friends that live there that tell me otherwise. That what he's saying is a bunch of bullshit garbage. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into this reporting without further delay by the New York Times. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get started, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and enjoy.
Judge permanently blocks National Guard deployments to Portland for ICE protests. This article is by Anna Griffin and read by an automated voice. President Trump overstepped his authority when he sought to deploy National Guard troops to Portland, Oregon, to protect the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office there. A federal judge ruled on Friday, issuing a permanent block on troop deployments to the city in response to anti-ICE demonstrations. Judge Karen J. Immergut of U.S. District Court, who was nominated to the bench by Mr. Trump, had previously issued a preliminary injunction blocking the president's order federalizing National Guard soldiers in Oregon in a lawsuit that was brought by the states of Oregon and California and the city of Portland. In her final 106-page ruling, Judge Immergut rejected arguments from government lawyers that protests at the ICE building made it impossible for federal officers to carry out immigration enforcement, represented a rebellion, or raised the threat of rebellion. She also found that the attempt to use National Guard soldiers in Oregon had violated the U.S. Constitution's 10th Amendment, which gives states any powers not expressly assigned to the federal government. The evidence demonstrates that these deployments, which were objected to by Oregon's governor and not requested by the federal officials in charge of protection of the ICE building, exceeded the president's authority, she wrote. Judge Immergut also disputed the president's claim that Antifa, at least in Portland, is an organized and cohesive group working against the federal government. She said testimony from the regional director for ICE about the level of damage at the Oregon facility or how disruptive the protests were was not believable, noting that demonstrators had minimally impeded federal workers. She added that her ruling does not preclude future efforts by the president to deploy the National Guard to Oregon. Federal lawyers indicated at a 3-day trial last week that if Judge Immergut ruled against them, they intended to appeal to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco. With the legal battle expected to continue, Judge Immergut stayed the portion of her ruling that would have reverted control of federalized Guard soldiers back to Oregon's governor for 14 days, essentially maintaining the status quo. A similar case involving the use of National Guard troops in Illinois is currently before the Supreme Court. Government Tina Kotek of Oregon, a Democrat, praised the ruling, saying it validates the facts on the ground. Oregon does not want or need military intervention, and President Trump's attempts to federalize the Guard is a gross abuse of power, she said in a statement. But the Department of Homeland Security objected to the judge's characterization of the protests in Portland. President Trump is using his lawful authority to direct the National Guard to protect federal assets and personnel in Portland following months of violent riots where officers have been assaulted and doxxed by left-wing rioters. Tricia McLaughlin, an assistant secretary with the department, said in a statement, "The president's lawful actions will make Portland safer." Daily demonstrations began outside Portland's ICE building in early June after the Trump administration ramped up immigration enforcement. The crowds have generally been small, usually fewer than a few dozen people, and peaceful, but protesters have occasionally blocked the building's driveway. They typically dispersed when federal officers in riot gear appeared. A few confrontations, however, have turned violent, with federal officers using tear gas, rubber bullets, and pepper spray balls. The protests, now into their 5th month, have strained the Federal Protective Service, the agency charged with guarding U.S. government buildings. On September 27th, Mr. Trump wrote on Truth Social that he planned to use full force to protect war-ravaged Portland. Later that day, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth asked Governor Kotek to activate 200 National Guard troops to help federal officers at the ICE building. Ms. Kotek refused, and the Trump administration responded by federalizing the soldiers and preparing to send them into Portland. The lawsuit argued that the president had failed to demonstrate that the deployment was justified. Under Title 10 of the U.S. Code, a president may use the National Guard on U.S. soil in only 3 circumstances: a foreign invasion, a rebellion, or threat of a rebellion, or if the laws of the nation cannot be enforced with existing resources. During the trial last week, administration lawyers argued that the last 2 conditions applied in Oregon. In her final ruling, Judge Immergut disagreed on both counts and said the demonstrations, with a few notable exceptions, were largely peaceful and not as disruptive nor as dangerous as federal officials suggested. The judge also wrote that she had been deeply troubled to discover that a small squad of Oregon National Guard troops were deployed at the ICE building after she had temporarily blocked their arrival in October. At trial, federal lawyers acknowledged that a group of 9 Guard soldiers had worked a shift at the facility on October 4th, starting in the late morning and stretching into late evening. After the judge had issued a temporary restraining order at 3:40 p.m., a few hours after the order, the administration flew 200 California National Guard troops to Oregon, apparently to replace the Oregon soldiers who had been barred from the ICE building. In other words, she wrote, defendants had time to order and coordinate the transport of federalized California National Guardsmen from Los Angeles to Portland, but needed more time to communicate with the Oregon National Guardsmen at the Portland ICE facility. Judge Immergut wrote that while she was not citing the federal government for contempt of court, this court expects defendants will provide further explanation when ordered to do so.
Ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, this is a positive legal development for Oregon. Great job, Oregon, City of Portland, and also California, because as you just heard in the reporting, that the Trump administration illegally tried to authorize or federalize the California National Guard yet again illegally and send them to Portland in response to these unlawful federalization attempts, in response to these federal protests, peaceful protests. Which, thankfully, the rule of law prevailed. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for this legal breaking reporting video analysis update. If you did enjoy this legal breaking reporting video analysis update, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and enjoy. For more, please hit the bell icon to stay up to date on all the legal breaking news that you need to know about. More to come soon, ladies and gentlemen.